and take your coffee break with me. Come and take your coffee break with me. Come and take your coffee. Come and take your coffee. Come and take your coffee break with me. So hello everyone and welcome back to Coffee Break with Candace. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays. We're just so glad that you're here for my last episode of the year. And I have a very special guest, a dear friend who has some incredible stories that I know he's going to share. He hasn't told me yet, so I'm excited. And so I'm just gonna let him introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself.
Hi, Candace. I don't know what stories yet I'm going to tell either.
It's going to be a surprise. That's fun.
But I do have stories.
Yeah.
Well, my name is Rush Evans. I am a friend of Candace Bellamy, and I'm honored to be on this show. Coffee Break with Candace is funny because I'll bet I'm your first guest to say this, because the only truly interesting thing about me is that I've never had a cup of coffee.
What?
I have a lot of experiences, and we'll talk about some of them. I've never had a cup of coffee in my life.
First of all, I just need to end this friendship immediately. I did not know. Are you? That is crazy. Like not a drop.
I've had a drop. I've had a little T90 sip half a dozen times, enough to know I don't like it.
Heresy. Okay. Anyway, carry on.
I know. But anyway, yeah. I host a few radio shows at KOOP Radio, KOOP, here in Austin. You have been on both of them several times a piece, actually, and I'm honored and proud of that because you're a wonderful Austin musician and a beautiful human being. But we already know that. People who watch this show know that. And I also write about music for a record collectors magazine called Goldmine. I'm pretty honored when I get to be on those pages. And I'm just a music goober collector, and I have an interesting life, and a lot. I collect music. I'm a record collector and a big concert goer, and describe who I am, one must merely see the movie Almost Famous. I am that teenager William Miller, except I was in my late 20s, early 30s when I started doing what he was doing, which was chasing my rock star hero dreams of meeting them and interviewing them and getting to write about them for a music magazine like he did for Rolling Stone in the 70s in that movie. And I have a friend who calls me the enemy because that's what they called the band called him in the movie. You're the enemy. You're the rock press. So I have a friend who says, you're the enemy. And I wear that proudly. But anyway, so yeah, I'm a goober collector fan. And that's why I have those two shows, because I'm just a fan.
That's awesome. So you said you're chasing this, I guess meeting these rock stars and writing and all that came to you like in your late 20s. Is that correct?
Yeah, it kind of fell into, I don't.
Well, tell us that story. That sounds so interesting.
Well, it is actually. I was subscribing to Goldmine Magazine and being a big record collector, and my girlfriend at the time said, you should write for them. You should send something and write an article about those Beatles tribute albums that you collect. So I did. I just wrote it. I just wrote a sort of a guide to these Beatles tribute records and mailed it into Goldmine Magazine, and they took it and they printed it, and it was the biggest deal ever, and it still is. And then because I worked at a television station for many years as my day job, which is another whole interesting thing. My father ran television stations his whole life, and I worked in the biz for 20 years, actually, in radio and TV. And now I've been at KOOP over 10 years, so which is nonprofit volunteerism. But so that means I guess I've been in broadcasting over 30 years now, Lord have mercy. because I'm 30. So, you know, it's amazing.
I know, just out of the womb and into the station.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
Straight
So, so I'm
anyway.
going to have, I'm going to actually have you back up because I feel like there's a whole, you know, backstory that we need to get from you because you do have that, like with your dad, your family, you know, yeah, radio and TV. So tell us a little more about that.
Well, I will. But the reason I mentioned TV just now, I'll finish that quick thought, is that because I worked at a television station, I got to meet some people who came by the station sometimes to be interviewed. And so I met Kinky Friedman, who I was a huge fan of, which is a big part of my story that I'll tell you in a minute, was how I got into Austin music in the 70s. So here it is, 10, 15 years after I was listening to Kinky Friedman, I'm meeting him, and I'm just like, hey, can I interview you for this Record Collectors magazine? And that was the beginning of that. So then, you know, years go by and I find myself, you know, on the phone with Ringo Starr. But anyway, so yeah, so that was writing about records, meeting Kinky and writing about him. And that's how that music journalism thing started. But anyway, to answer your question, my father was a pioneer broadcaster. He got into broadcasting in the 50s. He was calling basketball games on the radio in Pittsburgh, Kansas as a teenager. I mean, he got a job at a radio station in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and he fell in love with broadcasting, and television became very new. And he started out to go to dentistry school, and then television comes on.
How interesting. Wow.
Yeah. And he changed his whole career path and got into TV. And let me tell you something. When I say pioneer broadcaster, I mean, he did some innovative things. And he met everybody. You know, he met Elvis at the TV station in Abilene in the 50s.
Oh, that's awesome.
Driving himself, you know, and my dad hosted a television show called The Rush Hour.
Oh, I love it.
In Topeka, Kansas. That's where my parents met, working at the television station in Topeka, Kansas, which is where my sister and I were born. And so we were always fascinated with television and radio because of our father. Both my sister and I wound up in the biz in our early professional years. She worked at a radio station and then a TV station. I worked at a radio station, then a TV station. I never thought about that till right now. And we kind of followed in his footsteps. He was just so interesting. My parents had great professional lives. They used to go to these network meetings and come home. And my mother came back from a meeting once and said, in California with my father, a big CBS meeting, and they meet all the stars. I mean, they knew everybody, met everybody. It was crazy. And she comes back and says, well, I spent a bunch of time talking to a guy you need to know about. I'm like 12 at this time, 13 maybe. He suits your taste, named Groucho Marx. Groucho Marx. And I still don't forgive her for not getting me an autograph or something, but she came back and turned me on to Groucho and bought me a record of An Evening with Groucho. And, you know, thousands of records later, I still have that one for sure. And she got me into that. And, but my parents met everybody, you know, they're talking to Rod Serling and
oh wow! Do you have a Rod Serling story? I love Rod Serling.
Really?
I totally do.
I don't have a story except to say my father spent a long time talking to him once, and he really liked it.
Okay, that's enough for me. That's awesome.
He said very nice. And then but they met everybody, knew everybody. And one year they took us. I was in high school. My sister and I got to go with our parents to Los Angeles for the CBS meeting, and we get out of the car at the hotel, and there's Muhammad Ali standing right there.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, wow.
We went up and met him, and he signed an autograph for me. And then my sister says, "Wow, you really are good looking." And he looked up at her, and looked down, and he was signing. When he goes, "You better believe it, baby."
That's awesome. Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's so awesome. Oh my gosh. I love that so much. You better believe it, baby.
Through my father's, Linda Johnson. I mean, that's crazy. And, I was 11 I was 11. I was 11 when I met Lyndon Johnson. And that's a big deal.
It is.
So my parents, it was fascinating. We were fascinated with television and stuff. But anyway, so we moved to Austin when I'm 12 and from Waco. And my dad was general manager of KTBC, the television station that used to be owned by Lyndon Johnson. In fact, that's the reason we got here, was because Lyndon sold the TV station, and the new company that bought it hired my dad as the first general manager. So we get here, and one night my parents are off at some banquet thingy at Villa Capri Hotel. For old Austinites, they know where Villa Capri was. It's where the practice field is now, I-35 there. And my mom came back and said, we just saw this guy singing and you need to hear him. He lives here now. He came back from Nashville and he's about to get famous, like really famous. He wrote some great songs. And you need to hear him. His name's Willie Nelson.
No way. Oh my gosh.
So I went to the Austin Public Library down the street from my house and I checked out vinyl records in the weeks ahead. Willie Nelson, Jerry Jeff Walker, Rusty Weir, Kiki Friedman, Stephen Fromholtz. I fell in love with Austin music, and that was current. Those guys were making records right then. This is the mid 70s, and that was. Now we get to the thing that you made me want to talk about today, which is my love of Austin music, and that's how I get to do this radio show that you've been on. Because that night my mom came home and said, you need to hear this guy named Willie Nelson. I started listening to these Austin guys. I wasn't going to see them yet. I couldn't drive.
That's adorable.
But I was on my bicycle riding up the hill with these records and I was listening to these guys, and they all lived in my city. They lived in Austin, Texas, and they were playing at the Armadillo World Headquarters all the time then. And I didn't get to go. I did a few years later. I did go to the Armadillo 6 times in its last year, I'm happy to report. But I fell in love with Austin music, and some of those guys. And I got a book called The Improbable Rise of Redneck Rock, and it told stories about all these guys. Well, lo and behold, as years would unfold, just like the character in the Almost Famous movie, I was almost 40, I guess, when this happened, late 30s. I end up on the bus with Willie to interview him for Discovery's magazine. And I'm like,
oh, awesome.
I'm on Willie's bus. It's just me and him at the little dinette talking about records. This was dream come true. And then I met Fromholtz many times, a guy named Bobby Bridger, who's a brilliant Texas artist, who's in that book. And I was first hearing him. He's now a friend of mine. All of the guys that were in Jerry Jeff's band back in those days are all dear friends of mine. Freddie Kirch was his drummer. The first time I went to a concert of my own volition, was the Paramount Theater. Jerry Jeff Walker. Guy on drums was a guy named Freddie Kirch, who's now one of my dearest friends all these years later. So I fell in love with Austin music through that scene, and it was a scene. Those guys I just mentioned, they were all part of this thing called redneck rock, or contemporary country, or what? No, that's not the term. There was a redneck rock, and it was I don't know. There were some other names for it, but it was a scene happening in Austin, Texas, and it got a little national attention, and I fell hard for it. And if it weren't for that, I wouldn't be doing a radio show now where I could have someone like Candace Bellamy on. So I fell in love with Austin music, and you don't need to leave this town. You don't need to leave this town to hear every kind of music, because Austin wasn't just that little scene I was into from the mid 70s, which I still revere so much. And we just lost Billy Joe Shaver and Jerry Jeff Walker very recently, and those are guys with that Texas sound. But there's more. Look, I've got Stevie Ray Vaughan on my shirt right now. There was blues happening, and soul music happening, and every kind of music in Austin happening. And we have no genre. It's Austin music. You are as much a part of what makes Austin music special as Stephen Fromholtz and Stevie Ray and Willie were in the different eras in this time, in this wonderful town that we call home.
Your stories are so interesting. That's, having that backstory about your dad and how you your love of music and broadcast and how all that's come forward to where you are now is really special.
Yeah, I'm still into. I guess I don't grow up, but neither did my parents. I'm happy to report because uh, as, as years go by, you know, my wife and I would often meet my parents at Central Market, and they were way into music. You met my parents
I
because
know they were lovely people,
we
absolutely
came to see
lovely.
you, and I did not know you that well then. You had just been on my show one time, and we had met, and we came to see you, and they loved it. So they loved music, and I'll never. I mean, one time I said this at my mother's eulogy. One time I talk to my mother every day, and she said, "Hey, Dad and I watched a Rolling Stones documentary last night. I'm going to leave it on your chair when I come by the house this afternoon." I'm like, "Who are you? And what have you done with my mother? You guys watched a Rolling Stones documentary of your own volition, you know?" and and they're turning me onto it. So yeah, they got into music because of me, I guess. But I got into music because of them. See,
Yeah.
I took them to see Springsteen.
Oh,
Uh,
how cool.
yeah, in the '80s, and it changed their life. But the best show they'd ever seen in their lives, they weren't big concert goers or anything, but they'd seen a lot of music through business stuff. And they took my sister and I to and me to our first concerts, including the Carpenters in Waco, Texas, fifth row. It was amazing. But they had seen the great Louis Prima. Do you know who
Hmm.
that?
I know who that is.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Of course you do. That's right. You really do. Uh,
Yes.
they saw the great Louis Prima in Las Vegas in a lounge, these small lounges outside the big rooms. And my father had tears coming down his face. He was laughing so hard. And
Mm.
they both loved this extraordinary event and turned me on to that kind of. They would tell those stories of these things they got to experience. Well, then I became this big concert goer. I've literally seen thousands of shows, and but I don't know how much I would have seen if my parents hadn't told me about Louis Prima. And then years later, I got to interview Keely Smith, his musical partner of years, and Gia Mayon, his widow, also his musical partner of years, and his saxophone player Sam Butera, his sidekick for decades. Louis died in 1978, but
But just fun fact, like his son has a band. And
yeah,
so, yes, but here's the thing that's funny to me. So I only know about Louis Prima because of you. Um, and then I read about his son having a band, and there's a woman that's married to an actor in one of my favorite shows of all time, Supernatural, and she opens for his band sometimes.
oh,
So
you're
there's this whole thing that tied, but the
oh,
only way I have that connection is because I know who Louis Prima is because of you.
but yeah, there's a lot of small world connections. But my life in broadcasting and my life of record collecting and and my life of concert going, I guess all of those come from my parents. They were cool people. I'm very fortunate. I came from a lovely couple.
Mm-hmm.
It was very interesting. When my mother passed, my father started coming to my radio show every week. So yeah, getting to be on co-op is huge to me. And the musicians, you guys come. Before the pandemic hit, I was booked out a year because my show is Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. on co-op called The Singer and the Song. You have come on and sung just beautifully, and I get to just show up and some of my musical heroes come to me. Bobby Pritchard that I mentioned before, he's driven up from Houston 5 times just to do the show
Mm-hmm.
without a gig or anything. Just come up, do the show, and drive back to Houston. Joe King Carrasco was a huge hero of mine when he first came out, and he still is. He's come on the show, and Omar of Omar and the Howlers, I had them together and they jammed on the radio. It was one of the most extraordinary things.
Mm.
So I'll just go ahead and move into that point that I wanted to make today, Candace, is that again, I'm like the kid in Almost Famous, uh, but I've never felt like I belonged. I always felt like I didn't. I'm an outsider, kind of wanting to be in this music scene somehow. But thanks to the singer and the song and getting to do this show on Co-op, I I feel maybe I am like that kid in Almost Ready to See. He ends up being sort of traveling with the band, and I get to have people come on my show and ask me to come on the show.
But
Really
honestly, why do you think that is? Like, if you weren't such a great human being, and it's again for me, someone that knows you and have, I've heard some of your, stories and read some of the things you've written. It's the love is so evident there, and I think that's one of the things that draws people. At the end of the day, it's about the love you show for music, the love you and respect you show for musicians. People are just drawn to that, and they're happy to be a part of whatever you're doing. I mean, I know that's how I feel, and I know I believe so many others feel that same way.
well, thank you for saying it, but I guess you're supporting my point. The love I have for it is because I am, sorry to keep using this word, goober fan. I'm just a nerdy fan of music. Everybody's so great, and
I think it's just cool how you've carved out this interesting life in music, particularly, and the writing. You've written a lot. You said, was it Goldmine Magazine that you
yeah,
still write for?
I do. I haven't been in there much this year, but I'm still a contributor, and I wrote for years for a magazine called Discoveries, and they were sort of competitors, and then they wound up being bought out. One bought out the other, and they were both still in existence for a little while, but under the same roof, and then they finally just merged them into one. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I've written for Goldmine / Discoveries over many years, and I got through that connection that started the way I told you earlier. I got to meet. I mean, I got to interview Solomon Burke, and Ian Hunter, Art Garfunkel. I mean, the record that changed my life more than any in my life, and I have a lot of records, Candace.
I've heard.
Yeah, but more than any record, and I'm a Beatle maniac, and I'm known for that, and all the Austin, the singer-songwriter types. I'm known for association with a lot of things. My other radio show is called Off the Beatle Path. It's all things Beatles, because of my fascination. But the album that changed my life more than any other in the world is Simon and Garfunkel's Greatest Hits. That opened my mind to everything. I got to talk to Art Garfunkel on the phone, and in Bridge Over Troubled Water, we were talking about it, and he says, so then we come into that verse, and he goes, sail on, silver girl, sail on by. I'm like, oh. Art Garfunkel just sang a line from Bridge Over Troubled Water into the phone to me. That's bananas. And then when Ringo Starr called the house, forget about it. That was.
So tell us about that. He's not calling me, so I need to hear the story.
Well, there's not a whole lot to say except to say that I wanted to interview a Beatle, and I just chased it. I pursued it, and I went through his PR firm for 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I just kept saying, all right, for Goldmine, Ringo's got a new record coming. Oh, there's an all-star tour. And I just kept pestering. And then finally one day I got a phone call and said, Rush, it's your lucky day. We're going to schedule a Ringo interview for you. And we did. And it was very short, 8 minutes really, but it went well. I don't think I embarrassed myself too badly. And I had no idea it was going to run so short. So I wound up squishing, and I had all these talking points, and there was a publicist on the line, and she jumps in, and he was very nice, but she jumps in and she goes, Rush, your next question's your last. And I'm like, so I looked at my list of topics. So I rattled them all off in one question. And I said,
wow.
So you're so you've got a photo book and you're doing the all-star tours, but you're also still doing the solo recordings, and then you're busy, and your son's playing with the Who. I forgot what, I just rattled off like 6 things, like How do you do it all? You know. So that became my question. I just threw, and then his answer was gold. He says, "Well, you know, life is very busy, but we've got all day to fill it up."
Ooh, that's good.
Isn't that good? So I'm like,
Yes.
so maybe that was kind of a blessing because that was such a gold. That was like a hard, you know, he's the guy who said the phrase hard day. It's been a hard day's night. So he had these Ringoisms that he was famous for. I got a Ringoism, you know?
But that one is, I love that. That's
Isn't
so
it good?
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, now, Rush, we're going to do my segment called Who Said That, where I'm going to give you a quote and a clue. And if you guess who said that, I will donate a modest amount to the charity of your choice.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So tell us your charity.
I think um, I do have a long-suffering wife who's a lovely human being. I married very well. She is in the nonprofit world as well. She's a breast cancer survivor. I worked in cancer for some years, and she's been working in the cancer biz for 15 years, something like that, 17 years. And she is the executive director of a small local nonprofit called Breast Cancer Resource Center. And not research, but resource, Breast Cancer Resource Center. They provide direct services to clients, people who just got diagnosed with cancer, giving them emotional support, informational support, every kind of support through the entire process. So it's a good organization. So I'll say bcrc.org, Breast Cancer Resource Center, right here in Austin, Texas.
Fantastic. And I'm a fan of their organization, so even more so, I'm excited and hope that you get, the person who said that. And you only get one guess, so don't jump the gun.
Okay.
All right. So the quote is, "Some people feel the rain, others get wet." So would you like the clue?
Yes, I need the clues.
Okay. This is an American singer-songwriter, author, and visual artist, widely regarded as one of the greatest songwriters of all time, and has been a major figure in popular culture for more than 50 years. One of the greatest songwriters of all time. In fact, you mentioned him today. So, and he has, I'll give you a little more information. He's had some songs that have become anthems for the civil rights and anti-war movements. His lyrics during this period incorporated a range of political, social, philosophical, and literary influences, defied pop music conventions, and appealed to the burgeoning counterculture.
Wow. I have not heard the quote. So I don't know it specifically, but based on those clues and how cool a quote it is, there are a couple of people come to mind that I have mentioned today, but I think I'm going to go with Bob Dylan.
It is.
Oh,
yes. Congratulations.
Good.
Yeah. Any final words before we wrap up? This has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Off the Beatle Path is Mondays at noon on KOOP Radio. All things Beatle related. Singer and the Song is Saturdays at 3 on KOOP. Live performances when we're not in a pandemic. Reruns and special episodes right now. So it's just as fun, even though it's not musicians performing live in the studio right now. But we'll get back there.
Thank you so much, Rush, for being on Coffee Break with Candace. Come back anytime.